There's one I think is very good. It's called Bridges for Peace. That's a large group, evangelical, so they have an agenda for Israel. But they do monitor all the events around Israel and the things that are done there. I think they do a pretty good job of presenting the facts. And then there's a few blogs that I do read. One of them, I think, one of the best is called Joel Rosenberg, Joel Rosenberg, Rosenberg, just like Kathy if she's here. .blogspot.com. And he does a good job at analyzing the events as far as factual reporting, what's right and what's not right. So I think you just sort of have to look at it, but I think the biggest caution I would give is just don't believe it because you saw it on CNN.
And I think part of the reason for making the hyperbolic statement about not believing anything I read on the internet is basically linked to the uncritical things that are passed forward to me on occasion by brethren that are taking articles that are really out on the edge there and not accurate, and they're passing it around. We really have to be standing back, trying to be careful on analyzing the news before we take and draw any conclusions from it. So, in answer, I actually think that when we asked this question of you two brethren, what should we do for news, I think all three of us were in agreement that it's very, very important to try to sort out the hype from fact when we're dealing with Israel. There's a lot of good questions up here, brethren. There is not the time to answer those questions. We are going to encourage.
If you got a minute, Richard, I'd like your opinion on this issue around oil as being a possible springboard, bringing a further conflict with the Israel-Arab. Is that it? Well,
just to give a little thumbnail sketch, when I began my career, I worked for an oil company in 1974. It was a great time to work for an oil company. If you remember that there was something called the 1973 Arab oil embargo, and the United States was committed that they were going to become energy independent within the decade, and this would never happen again. Now, at that point in time, the United States consumed 14 million barrels a day of oil, and the domestic production was 9 million. Today, the United States consumes 20 million barrels a day of oil, and the domestic production is 8 million. And the Oil and Gas Journal's report for mid-year that came out last week said that there are more oil and gas rigs than there have ever been in the history of this country drilling deeper. And issues like Anwar and so forth are the Arctic National Wildlife Reserve are really not long-term solutions. So there has been a concern within the industry about something called peak oil. It's going to start driving politics. We're seeing the rise in oil prices now, and of course, if the Straits of Hormuz are closed, this would create a crisis in terms of the spot market for oil and drive prices right through the ceiling. So, no, I think it's a very serious issue that's going to drive the politics. And Brother Jim, I think your thought was that the oil amongst the Arabs is right now the way they are buying influence in the United States, and I just wondered if you wanted to comment a little further on how you see some of that playing out in terms of the politics in the near future.
Okay, I think it's more or less just what I mentioned before, that it will take Sheba and Dedan, that is Arabia, and bring it to the head of the Western Bloc.
And so
I think that's pretty significant. If you look at today, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, combined oil income in 2007 was $381 billion, and another $26 billion from gas. And they will have, it's estimated, if oil just stays above $100 a barrel, those countries are going to have a cumulative windfall of almost $9 trillion by 2020. That's McKinsey Global Institute, which is a fairly reliable projection. So I think oil could be indeed a big factor in Middle East politics.
And leaving aside that specific issue, there is something called the Hubbard's Peak. There have been 25 studies conducted throughout the world on when we go through a peak in world oil production. Once you pass that peak, the structure of pricing oil changes very, very dramatically. There is nobody who believes it's not either right around the corner or not, or within the next 10 years. So on those notes, we will suggest to the convention committee that there are some excellent questions here that need to be answered, excellent questions for the brethren to consider in their studies and work at coming up with answers. Brother Jim, you want to get one last comment?
Did you want to get to the conclusion slide?
Yes, let's get to the conclusion slide. What should we do, Brother Jim?
I think that is the important question. What should you and I do? One thing we've observed, and we've gone through it, every major world event for 130 years has contributed one major step towards the restoration of Israel. What's destructive to this world is constructive to Israel. I don't expect it to change for the last two plagues. Number one, for us, we've got to change ourselves from what we are to what we are supposed to be. And the Bible tells us what we are supposed to be. Number two, especially if the Depression is the next major world event, there's two things to do about it. Get out of debt and stay out of debt. 3, encourage our Jewish acquaintances, and that is most especially the youth, to make Aliyah, to go to Israel before it is difficult. 4, if and when public opinion turns against the Jews, as it did in Germany, for example, and then afterwards in the Soviet Union, if public opinion turns against the Jews, have nothing at all to do with it. Don't go along with it. And 5, recognize that the Lord has given us the restoration of Israel as a concrete pledge that He will indeed establish His kingdom.
Well said.
Amen.
Yes.
Brethren, it's been a blessing to share some of these thoughts. We hope it's a stimulus to your studies and that it's an encouragement. We are told to lift up our heads as we see these things taking place and rejoice